Hey there, welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the channel where history gets cold but the voice stays warm. Tonight we're following medieval soldiers into the one place they feared more than the battlefield, the night before it. When the fires burned low, the tents sagged with frost, and everyone quietly wondered whether sleep would kill them faster than the enemy. So, before you settle in, take a quiet moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy learning how humans have always suffered creatively. And if you want to join the conversation, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's strangely comforting to know how many of us are awake at unreasonable hours, each freezing in our own century. Now, dim the lights, maybe pull up a blanket that doesn't smell like horse, and let's wander gently into the medieval camp, a place where valour went to bed in wet socks. You arrive late in the afternoon, just as the sun begins to abandon everyone equally. The air already bites. Your armour, heroic in daylight, now feels like a metal refrigerator you volunteered to live in. You are promised glory, but what you get first is weather. Around you, hundreds of tents bloom across the muddy plain, thin canvas cones that look brave until the wind hits them. The ground isn't frozen yet, which means it's worse, a thick grey soup that clings to boots and dignity alike. You stamp down your small patch of mud, because apparently this is where you'll both sleep and rot. Setting up camp sounds easy in theory. In practice, it's a slapstick tragedy performed in freezing wind. The poles don't fit, the ropes are stiff, your fingers have lost all sensation except pain. Someone insists on reading instructions no one can see because parchment and sleet aren't friends. Eventually, a structure resembling a tent appears. Part house, part surrender. You crawl inside and immediately hit your head on the crossbeam, an early sign that comfort is not on tonight's schedule. Inside, it smells of wet wool and optimism dying slowly. The ground is already damp. You lay down a bundle of straw, a gesture really, because straw is nature's way of saying, I tried. It crackles under you, releasing the scent of something that was alive until very recently. Still, it's better than sleeping directly on the earth, which radiates cold like it has a personal grudge. Nearby, someone's attempting to start a fire. You hear flint striking steel, followed by swearing creative enough to impress a monk. The wood's wet, the wind is cruel, and smoke insists on blowing into every direction except up. Eventually, a small flame takes hold. Everyone gathers around it as though it's a saint performing miracles. The warmth is symbolic, but the illusion matters. For a few minutes, morale rises just enough for someone to mention home. Then the fire sputters, and morale freezes again. You glance toward the noble tents. Larger, drier, guarded by men who get to keep their fingers. Inside, furs are laid on carpets, wine is poured, and the Lord congratulates himself on strategic brilliance. Out here, strategy means deciding which side to sleep on so your armour doesn't stab you in the ribs. Equality, it turns out, has a temperature, and it's lower than expected. As night closes in, every sound sharpens. You hear the rhythmic hammer of tent pegs, horses shifting restlessly, and a wind that never quite stops complaining. Your breath fogs the air, a private ghost that lingers briefly before dying of exposure. You pull your cloak tighter, scratchy, damp, but loyal. The fabric stiffens where the water freezes. Every exhale feels like it might snap. Someone jokes that the enemy doesn't need to attack. Winter's already winning. No one laughs, which is fair. The joke's too accurate to be funny. You realise there's no distinction between day's end and defeat. They both arrive quietly. The fire shrinks to embers. The mud stiffens. Even the stars look cold, each one watching like a distant, indifferent commander. You lie down on your straw mat, trying to pretend the shape beneath you is comfort and not a rock plotting against your spine. The wind presses the tent walls inward, sighing with the weight of another pointless campaign. You close your eyes and tell yourself tomorrow will be warmer. because lying to yourself is also a survival tactic. Outside, a dog whimpers. Inside, someone snores like a dying bagpipe. And between them, you drift into what could generously be called sleep. Not rest, not peace, just a short truce with consciousness, negotiated by exhaustion. If you dream, it's a fire that doesn't smoke and bread that isn't frozen. But that's luxury. You've earned the right to imagine comfort, even if it's fictional. The night stretches on, unbothered by your suffering. You're not the first to learn that in medieval warfare, survival was less about courage and more about finding a dry patch of straw before someone else did. When you wake for the first time that evening, it's not because you slept well. It's because someone nearby coughed with the intensity of divine punishment. The air in your tent has become dense, half breath, half weather, and you begin to understand why armies lost more battles to the climate than to each other. You crawl out to stretch your legs and immediately regret it. The ground has frozen unevenly, so each step is either mud pretending to be water or ice pretending to be safety. Around you, hundreds of tents sag under frost, their ropes groaning like exhausted violin strings. Some have collapsed entirely, now resembling damp canvas graves. Others, miraculously upright, flap and wheeze as if sighing about their life choices. And then you see it. The noble quarter. Where your tent looks like a punishment, theirs looks like architecture. Tall ridge tents striped in bright colours, fluttering with banners that suggest optimism or denial. At the entrance, servants hurry in and out carrying firewood, furs and wine jugs so heavy they might as well be medals. The nobles dine inside, seated on stools that don't collapse, wrapped in cloaks that once belonged to animals with better lives. From outside you can hear laughter, slow, self-satisfied and well-fed. You stand there, half frozen, wondering if laughter burns calories. If so, they're safe from starvation. Back in your section of camp, the common tents huddle together for moral support. Each is a patchwork of canvas, wool and unearned optimism. Rain and smoke have turned them the same colour as despair. A few have makeshift trenches dug around them, meant to divert water. They now collect it instead, forming what historians later call evidence of effort. Your own tent is one good gust away from becoming a flag. Inside, warmth follows a clear hierarchy. The centre is prime territory, reserved for the heavier sleepers or the most creative liars. The outer edge is colder, riskier, and usually assigned to whoever lost the dice game earlier. Hierarchy doesn't end at the battlefield. It simply changes material. The nobles measure status by fur thickness. You measure it by how close you are to someone's armpit. The straw on your floor was generous when fresh, about 5 minutes ago. Now it has flattened into a thin, crunchy biography of everything wrong with the evening. Beneath it, the frozen mud adds character, and possibly tetanus. You shake out your blanket, which manages to feel both damp and sharp. A textile contradiction that could be studied by philosophers. You hear a rustle at the tent flap. A servant carrying a torch peers in, wrong tent, and freezes like a guilty raccoon. He's clutching a sheepskin meant for his lord's bed. You stare at him. He stares back. For a long, meaningful moment, both of you understand that morality is a summer luxury. Then he vanishes into the night, taking the warmth and the ethical debate with him. Outside, someone tries to start another fire. The sound is unmistakable, the rapid tink-tink-tink of flint, followed by that long, hollow pause of human despair. When the spark finally catches, the camp cheers softly, not because it's warm, but because something, anything, worked as intended. The smoke instantly fills the tent row, a choking, eye-watering miracle. You cough until you can't tell if your eyes are watering from the heat or the emotion of survival. Meanwhile, from the noble's tent comes the smell of roasted meat and spiced wine. They imported the spices, the meat, and probably the warmth itself. You smell it and your stomach begins to negotiate with your soul. A voice in your head says, "Be content. You serve a greater cause." Another voice replies, "The greater cause smells delicious." A fellow soldier mutters that nobles sleep on carpets thick enough to muffle regret. You believe him. You've seen the inventory lists: squirrel furs, velvet curtains, perfumed oil lamps, and embroidered bedding valuable enough to be inherited. If their tent caught fire, it would probably burn luxuriously. You look down at your own bedding: straw, damp cloak, one questionable boot used as pillow. Luxury, you decide, is relative. After all, the noble's tent has 10 people inside, including parasites with better taste. When the wind picks up, the canvas snaps like a whip, sending a ripple through the camp. Your tent pole trembles heroically and then leans as if reconsidering its career. The rope hums. You whisper a promise to fix it in the morning, which is historical shorthand for never. The cold deepens. You pull your cloak tighter, but the fabric has absorbed so much smoke that it feels more like a wet promise than clothing. Your breath condenses on your mustache, freezing it into decorative icework. You consider moving closer to the fire, but you remember the rule: the closer to the flame, the greater the risk of becoming part of it. So you stay put, radiating a cautious optimism of roughly 3 degrees Celsius. Inside the noble tent, someone begins to sing, a slow ballad about honour and destiny. Out here, the wind provides percussion. You can't help noticing that both sound equally sincere. You lie down, adjusting the straw to avoid the dampest patches, and listen as the camp settles. Snoring starts early. It's the only thing warmer than conversation. You close your eyes, and for a brief, foolish moment, imagine the noble's tent. Soft bedding, dry air, faint scent of cinnamon, and think, perhaps one day you'll be there. Then a drop of condensation falls from the canvas straight onto your forehead, and history gently reminds you to stop dreaming. Sleep, when it finally comes, is not rest. It's a democratic experience shared by the miserable and the privileged alike. Except the privileged get pillows. You pull your cloak tighter, feel the straw crinkle beneath you, and drift into another round of unconscious compromise. You wake up unsure if you actually slept or simply passed out in slow motion. The air is damp enough to chew. Your breath fogs so thickly you half expect to bump into it on the way out. And beneath you, a symphony of straw, mud, and regret. The medieval army never invented the luxury of bedding. They invented approximations of bedding. The first rule of campaign comfort was simple. If it was once alive and reasonably dry, you could sleep on it. Straw, hay, rushes. All popular options for those unconcerned with cleanliness or the concept of boundaries. Someone with experience insists you shake it first. You do. Something small and motivated scurries away. Congratulations. You've just discovered the medieval mattress warranty. If it moves, you keep it. The straw crunches beneath you, a sound somewhere between brittle toast and distant crying. It smells faintly of goat, smoke, and something else you choose not to identify. Each stalk has absorbed enough moisture to be technically composting, which means your bed is alive in every sense that matters. The warmth it provides is minimal, psychological mostly, but the illusion counts. You roll over and discover that straw has 2 states, too flat or stabbing. There is no middle ground. A nearby soldier complains that his bedding has gone missing. You glance discreetly at your own pile, which has mysteriously doubled in size overnight. Morality in winter is a fluid concept. He mutters that he'll steal more from the stables later, which explains why the horses look nervous. Straw was the army's great equalizer. Nobles had it stuffed in linen sacks. You just slept directly on the concept of straw. Every few days it was replaced, not because anyone believed in hygiene, but because the smell began competing with the latrine. New, straw crackled with freshness for exactly one night, then settled into its true identity. A moist, squeaky ecosystem. If you listen closely, the tent has its own ecosystem too. You can hear it. faint rustles under the mat, the delicate tapping of flea acrobatics, the determined crawl of beetles committed to their night shift. You lie very still, partly from fatigue, partly from diplomacy. The medieval bed was a peace treaty between you and the local wildlife. You occupy the top layer, and everything else negotiates underneath. Someone claims that burning straw repels pests. Someone else points out that burning straw also repels tents. The argument ends when a gust of wind snuffs the fire, and democracy wins again. The smell inside your tent is a layered masterpiece. First, damp wool, the universal scent of regret. Then straw turning sweet as it ferments in the mud. Finally, the faint tang of smoke, sweat, and something that might once have been leather. It's less a scent and more a historical experience. You inhale deeply, because you have no choice. You try rearranging the bedding, but medieval ergonomics is a cruel joke. There's always a hidden lump positioned perfectly for maximum spinal insult. After several attempts, you accept that comfort was outlawed sometime in the 13th century. At least the fleas seem content. Outside, the mud floor gurgles softly, thawing from last night's freeze. When it rains, the ground seeps upward, turning the tent into an early experiment in indoor plumbing. Each step produces that slow, sticky suction sound. Nature applauding your resilience. You place your boots beside the entrance to dry. By morning, they'll be frozen solid, perfectly foot-shaped monuments to bad decisions. At the edge of the tent, one man's blanket steams slightly from his body heat. He calls it victory. You call it evidence that the fire's smoke has found a new target. Everyone smells faintly of ash now, which mercifully keeps the insects confused or nostalgic. Some soldiers swear the smoke keeps lice away. Others think the lice just adapt, the way humans do. A veteran beside you mutters an old rhyme. Clean men die cold, and dirty men die old. You decide not to test the theory. There's a thin layer of grease on your tunic, formed from sweat, dirt, and the blessings of lanolin-rich wool. It's disgusting, but it's working. You're warmer than yesterday, which feels like a promotion. You scratch absent-mindedly at your sleeve and wonder if the itching is the price of survival or the start of a long relationship. Probably both. By evening, the straw starts to freeze where your breath hits it. Each exhale crystallizes into tiny frost flakes, glittering in the candlelight. It would almost be beautiful if it weren't part of your bedding. Someone nearby sneezes, followed by another. Soon the whole tent echoes like an orchestra of damp trumpets. Disease spreads faster than gossip, which is impressive given the competition. You pull your cloak tighter, fold your arms under it, and try to ignore the sensation of things that aren't you moving near your feet. It's fine, you tell yourself. It's warmth by association. You adjust your hood, the wool nightcap that makes everyone look slightly ridiculous, and lie still. A drop of condensation lands on your cheek, cold enough to feel personal. You whisper a short prayer, the kind everyone knows but no one really believes will help. If I should die before I wake, please let it be after breakfast. Outside, the wind howls like an unpaid bard. The tent shakes but holds, and you realise the medieval secret to endurance isn't courage or faith. It's simply the ability to lower your standards until anything that doesn't actively kill you feels like a victory. Somewhere in the dark, the noble's tent rustles too. Inside, someone shifts on a feather bed, sighs, and pulls another fur blanket higher. You envy him briefly, then smile faintly. Because if there's one comfort the cold can't take, it's knowing that even the rich have to wake up tomorrow, and the ground doesn't care who they are. You close your eyes, sink deeper into the straw, and let the insects sing you to sleep. There's a saying in the camp, a soldier without fire is a corpse rehearsing. It's not inspirational, it's statistical. By the time evening settles again, the cold has a personality. Moody, vindictive, and convinced it deserves more attention. You decide to build a fire. Everyone does. And for the next few hours, the entire army performs the same comedy in slow motion. Men hunched in the mud, coaxing damp sticks like reluctant pets. It starts optimistically. You strike flint and steel, producing a spark so tiny it might be imaginary. Someone crouches beside you, offering advice that's mostly shouting. Another adds wood, a bold move considering it's still half a tree. Eventually the spark catches. Smoke begins to rise, then immediately turns around and comes back to see what you taste like. Within minutes, your tent is filled with the comforting aroma of choking. The fire smoulders, sputters, and hisses like an angry alchemist. Someone mutters a prayer to St. Lawrence, patron saint of cooking and being cooked. You're not sure which side of the miracle you're on. This is the problem with medieval heating systems. They work beautifully in drawings. In reality, most of the warmth escapes straight through the roof, while all the smoke stays to socialise. Every eye burns, every throat scratches, but no one moves, because even smoky warmth is preferable to honest cold. It's the first lesson of campaign life. Suffering is communal. Warmth is theoretical. A clever man suggests building a trench for the fire to channel the smoke away. You all nod appreciatively at his intelligence. The trench immediately fills with water. The clever man is reassigned to optimism, management. Someone else recalls a trick from home, banking the fire. You bury the embers under ash to keep them alive through the night. You try it, shaping the pile carefully like a sleeping cat. When you wake the next morning, the cat is dead, and so is the fire. But you respect the effort. Failure in the medieval sense still counts as experience. The smoke does have one hidden virtue. It kills fleas, or at least offends them into temporary exile. The tent becomes a fumigation chamber. Less home, more slow roast. You smell like smoked wool, which sounds luxurious until you realise you're the wool. Outside, another tent has caught fire entirely. No one panics. Everyone just watches with quiet admiration as the flames consume canvas like divine justice. It's the warmest anyone has been all week. Someone jokes that if we all set our tents ablaze, at least we'll die comfortable. A few men nod thoughtfully, as if considering it a legitimate strategy. Eventually, your own fire settles into something almost cooperative. The flames lick at the logs, the air warms by a degree or two, and morale rises to slightly less miserable. You huddle around it with your comrades. The universal image of survival since the invention of both fire and disappointment. Hands outstretched, you savour the heat, feeling life trickle back into your fingers like reluctant employees. For a few minutes, it's perfect. Then the wind shifts, and all the smoke returns to your face. You blink through the haze, coughing like a man allergic to existence. Someone claims that the smoke keeps away evil spirits. You assume the spirits just have better boundaries. By now your cloak has absorbed enough soot to qualify as a cooking ingredient. You flap it once and watch a small dust cloud of history rise. The edges of the fabric are singed from standing too close to yesterday's fire. You think about sewing it, then remember that needles are for rich people and regret. Across the camp, nobles burn imported charcoal. Clean, hot, and odourless. They call it refinement. You call it cheating. Their fires glow inside tall metal braziers, guarded by servants with ladles. Yours glows inside a shallow pit, guarded by men with frostbite. Different aesthetics, same desperation. As night deepens, the flames shrink. You feed the fire one stick at a time like a fragile friendship. Each spark floats upward, briefly alive, then fades into the dark. You follow it with your eyes, watching it disappear into the infinite cold above. For a second, you imagine warmth is not a resource but a state of mind. Then a gust of wind blows through the tent and philosophy dies gasping. Before sleep, you perform the sacred ritual of fire banking again, covering the embers gently, whispering encouragement. The act feels strangely intimate, like tucking in a small god you don't fully believe in. If it survives the night, you'll be grateful. If it doesn't, you'll pretend it never happened. That's the soldier's creed. Deny the obvious, survive the impossible, and never admit you were cold. When the others lie down, the fire casts a red glow across their faces, flickering like a candle in a cathedral of mud. Outside, the wind howls and the canvas trembles, but inside, for a few rare moments, you almost feel human. It's a fragile piece, smoky, scratchy, and likely toxic, but peace nonetheless. You roll onto your side, the straw crunching beneath you, eyes half open, watching the ember pulse like a heartbeat. It's hard not to admire its persistence. It burns because it doesn't know how to quit, which you realise is probably the only reason anyone here is still alive. Sleep creeps in, heavy and smoky. You breathe through your sleeve, trying to filter out both the fumes and the thoughts, and as you drift off, you hear the faint crackle of fire arguing quietly with the cold. Neither side wins, but they keep trying. And somehow, that's enough to get you through another night. By the 5th night, you've stopped pretending this is temporary. The cold has moved in, unpacked its things, and started charging rent. Everyone's found their rhythm now, a rhythm that sounds mostly like teeth chattering in harmony. You learn that warmth, like everything else in the army, obeys the chain of command. The higher your rank, the thicker your blanket. And if that isn't written in the rulebook, it might as well be carved into the ice. The noble tents glow faintly in the distance, each one lit by oil lamps that never seem to run out. Inside, the officers recline on feather-stuffed mattresses, wrapped in cloaks lined with fox, bear, or occasionally something so exotic it's almost extinct. They drink warm wine mixed with spices, because apparently cinnamon was worth more than conscience. Servants circulate quietly, tending the braziers, refilling cups and pretending not to exist. Someone plays a lute, gently, smugly. You can almost hear the sound of comfort. It's somewhere between a satisfied sigh and the rustle of fur against fabric. From this distance it sounds like treason. Out here among the infantry, the hierarchy of warmth looks different. The only fur you have is still attached to the animal you share the tent with. Blankets are communal, passed down the line like family heirlooms that no one wanted. You wrap yourself in a cloak so stiff with smoke and grease it could probably stand on its own. It smells like history, desperation, and a faint note of wet dog. Still, everyone has their tricks. Some soldiers sew patches of sheepskin into their cloaks, others rub lanolin into the fabric. Sheep grease turned miracle insulation. It's disgusting, but it works. You can always spot the veterans. They're the ones who look perpetually oily and perpetually alive. Boots are another story. At this point, your feet are less body parts and more frozen relics. You stuff them with straw, wrap them in rags, and pray to whichever saint covers toes. There's probably one. There was a saint for everything. Saint Apollonia handled toothaches. Saint Blay covered throats. Surely someone, somewhere, looked out for frozen extremities. Meanwhile, the officers enjoy slippers, silk-lined, fur-trimmed, smugly useless. They pace their carpets, debating strategy and destiny, while the rest of you debate whether it's worth getting out of bed to chase the rat making eye contact from the corner. You do learn one thing from watching them. Luxury has side effects. When warmth is guaranteed, you stop appreciating it. They sleep soundly, unaware that just a few tents away, soldiers are learning the sacred art of sharing body heat with livestock. In a way, it's almost comforting. Even the unfairness feels consistent. Someone in your tent jokes that nobles burn imported charcoal because they are allergic to smoke. Everyone laughs, quietly, bitterly, but it still counts as laughter. The truth is their fires do burn cleaner, brighter, longer. Your fire burns shorter, dirtier, and occasionally sideways, but at least it has personality. Late into the night, one of the men near you begins humming. It's not a song you recognise, but it fits the air, low, tired, a little hopeful. Before long, a few others join in, voices blending with the sound of wind. The result is neither tuneful nor entirely human, but it's something like warmth in musical form, a kind of shared defiance that doesn't need melody to matter. You lie back on your straw, staring at the tent roof where frost crystals have begun to form tiny constellations. Someone once said that stars are holes in the sky where the light gets in. Up here, you think they're holes in the tent where the cold gets out. But you appreciate the effort. Every once in a while, a messenger stumbles through checking on the ranks. He records who's fit for duty, who's dead, and who's pretending to be both. It's a short list because at this point, those categories overlap. You wonder what the chroniclers will write about this campaign. They'll mention the victories, the banners, the honour. They won't mention the smell. History prefers heroism to hygiene. You adjust your cloak, pull it tighter, and try to ignore the fact that it's damp again. The man beside you mumbles something about summer. Everyone laughs softly, as if summer were a myth invented by rich people. Outside, the noble fires burn bright, casting a glow across the snow. From afar, it almost looks beautiful. Tiny islands of light scattered across a sea of suffering. You try not to hate them for it. After all, someone has to look warm in the paintings. When you finally lie down, you find that one edge of your cloak has frozen to the straw. You pull it free, breaking the ice with a sound like thin glass. The motion releases a faint puff of lanolin scent. Earthy, greasy, oddly comforting. You inhale deeply, decide it smells like survival, and let your eyes close. The fire crackles, the wind moans, and somewhere far away, an officer snores inside his luxury tent, blissfully unaware that equality, at least tonight, exists only in temperature complaints. You drift into shallow sleep, halfway between envy and exhaustion. The body relaxes just enough to forget its place, and for a brief, flickering moment, everyone, noble or common, is simply human, trying not to freeze in the same indifferent night. You learn quickly that armour, for all its glamour in paintings, is basically a wearable refrigerator. It gleams at noon, freezes by dusk, and spends the night conducting the full orchestra of hypothermia. Still, most soldiers keep it on, not for glory, but for fear. Fear of theft, fear of frostbite, fear of discovering what lies beneath after 2 weeks without laundry. Removing armour means exposure, and exposure means regret, so you sleep in it. The medieval term for this was readiness. Modern medicine might call it circulatory negligence. First comes the padded gambeson, thick linen stuffed with wool, sweat, and yesterday's weather. It smells faintly of damp bread left too close to the fire. Over that, mail or plate, depending on your salary and your optimism. By bedtime, your body heat has transformed the interior climate into something best described as humid regret. Every movement squeaks. You shift slightly and the sound is like two pots arguing. Silence returns except for the faint clink of 1,000 tiny metal apologies. Some men take off the heavier plates but keep the padding. It's warmer, softer, and slightly less lethal if you roll over wrong. Others swear by sleeping upright, propped against shields, ready to leap into battle or collapse from exhaustion, whichever arrives first. Either way, comfort is a rumour spread by people who own pillows. You tighten your wool hood, the medieval nightcap, technically a garment, spiritually a cry for help. It ties under the chin like a modest executioner's mask, trapping a small pocket of heat around the head. Without it, body warmth escapes so quickly it might file for independence. With it, you resemble a monk on laundry day. But you're warmer, and in war, dignity is strictly decorative. Inside the tent, the air is thick with metal, smoke, and men who haven't removed a single layer since the last crusade. Someone jokes that if you strike a spark off any of you, the tent will ignite. No one doubts it. When sleep finally begins its siege, you discover a new sensation. Pressure. Chain links dig into your shoulder blades. buckles press against unidentifiable bones. Your fingers, trapped inside stiff gloves, go numb in alphabetical order. Your legs ache from the constant reminder that steel was never designed for dreams. But there's an odd comfort in the restriction, the feeling that if death comes, it will have to make an appointment. Half an hour later, the watch bell rings. It's your turn. You stumble out into the night like a medieval wind chime, joints creaking, armour whispering complaints. The stars above shimmer coldly, reflecting off the metal curves of helmets like frost made permanent. Each step in frozen mud produces that sticky pop, the sound of loyalty detaching from common sense. The campfire smoulders low. You crouch beside it, stretching your hands toward the fading glow, and the armour steals the heat before your skin notices. It's an elegant betrayal. You feed the fire a few scraps of wood, mumbling something halfway between prayer and profanity. Smoke curls upward, catches on your helmet rim and pours straight down your collar. The experience is both cleansing and carcinogenic. After your shift, you crawl back inside the tent, eyes stinging, lungs lightly smoked. The others have rearranged themselves into a pile that could be mistaken for camaraderie. You wedge yourself into the outer edge, the cold zone, the democratic punishment. Someone mutters a short prayer, the one everyone knows. If I die before I wake. Everyone answers with silence, which in soldiers' language means same. The wind outside picks up, brushing over the camp like an impatient ghost. Tents rustle, ropes groan, horses snort disapproval. From somewhere far away comes a single metallic crash, a fallen shield, or perhaps another dream surrendering. You shift again, trying to find the sweet spot between freezing and suffocating. There isn't one. The armour presses down, heavy and parental. You breathe shallowly, wondering whether the clinking sound is real or just your imagination echoing. Either way, it's oddly soothing, a lullaby composed entirely of exhaustion and iron. Sleep creeps in cautiously, the way it does for people who don't entirely trust it. You drift between awareness and something close enough to rest that you take it as victory. The mind wanders. You dream of warmth, but in a logical way, perhaps a forge, perhaps a small local volcano. In the dream, you're still wearing armour. Even your subconscious has discipline. At some point you wake again, or maybe you never stopped. The fire outside crackles faintly, footsteps pass by on patrol. The air in the tent feels colder than before, as if the night has decided to invest in ambition. You pull your cloak tighter over the metal, trapping the remaining heat. It's not much, but it's yours. Somewhere nearby, a noble sniffs the perfumed air of his brazier and calls this winter strategy. You call it cheating. Still, you can't hate him entirely. His comfort will make him soft. The cold, on the other hand, is training you for immortality. When morning finally limps over the horizon, you realise you've survived another night. That makes you statistically impressive and emotionally bankrupt. You stretch. The sound is half yawn, half hinge. The armour groans, dusting the air with frozen condensation. You rise slowly, every movement accompanied by that distinct metallic sigh, the sound of history pretending to be valour. At some point, the army collectively decides that modesty is an outdated concept. It's not official policy, just practical mathematics. One blanket divided by 5 freezing bodies. You share it, or you die politely. In the medieval hierarchy of survival, warmth outranks dignity. A man can only shiver so long before the social order collapses into a human knot. And so, each night soldiers arrange themselves like a very sad deck of cards. Overlapping, uneven, and quietly resentful. It's not affection, it's thermodynamics. Still, proximity breeds strange kinds of friendship. You've known these men for weeks, but after tonight, you'll know them more intimately than you ever wished. One snores like a saw through wet wood. Another kicks in his sleep, possibly fighting invisible heretics. Someone drools with such enthusiasm it might qualify as irrigation. And yet, when pressed together under the same damp cloak, it all feels oddly communal, like suffering turned into teamwork. The blanket itself is an artifact of despair. Wool, smoke, and history stitched together. It smells of everything it's touched: sweat, ash, wet dogs, faint traces of victory. When you pull it over your head, it traps a thin pocket of warmth and a thick concentration of regret. But that's fine. Warmth and regret have always travelled together. Sleeping arrangements follow an unspoken law. The strongest men take the outer edge, forming a human shield against the drafts. The frail or feverish sleep in the middle, where survival odds improve by roughly one prayer. It's a silent agreement, an act of grim courtesy no one mentions aloud. Even cold has a moral code. Someone mutters that it's better to sleep east so your soul faces Jerusalem. Someone else says that's nonsense. Warmth doesn't come from theology. Still, you notice half the tent slowly rotate toward the sunrise, because in freezing conditions, faith becomes just another blanket. There's a rhythm to shared sleep. Cough, sigh, shuffle, curse, repeat. The tent fills with the soft percussion of exhaustion. You lie still, counting breaths that don't belong to you, wondering if your own sounds as desperate. After a while, warmth begins to spread. Faint, fragile, collective. You can feel the gradient where humanity turns from solid to liquid. It's not comfort exactly, but it's proof you're not alone. In this world, that's close enough. Then the lice begin their campaign. They move like tiny tacticians exploring new terrain. You scratch carefully, not enough to disturb the pile, but enough to remind them who's in charge. The lice ignore you, as history often does. A man near the edge mutters in his sleep, something about home, fire, or bread. No one interrupts him. For a moment, you can almost picture it. A real bed. A dry roof, a world where sleeping doesn't require negotiations. Then a gust of wind blows through the tent flap and nostalgia freezes mid-sentence. You pull the blanket tighter, pressing shoulder to shoulder, and discover that human contact has a specific scent. Wool, salt, and quiet surrender. It's not pleasant, but it's reassuringly consistent. Someone breaks the silence to ask whether anyone else hears scratching under the straw. Everyone pretends they don't. Collective denial is the army's second line of defence. Time drifts oddly here. You can't tell if it's midnight or merely dark again. Outside, the wind rattles the tent ropes like a rhythm section. Inside, the air is thick and warm enough to fog the canvas walls. If you press your hand against it, it comes away damp. Proof that you're all still exhaling, still alive. A superstition spreads that snoring attracts demons. If that's true, you're doomed. Half the camp sounds possessed already, but no one wakes them. In a place where breathing counts as courage, snoring is practically heroic. When morning finally threatens to exist, the blanket feels heavier, saturated with night air and bad dreams. You peel it back like wet paper, releasing a small cloud of collective odour into the dawn. The men groan, stretch, and check for missing toes. You tell yourself it's fine. After all, you only need most of them. Someone jokes that this is what brotherhood smells like. No one laughs, but everyone exhales through the nose, which counts. As you step outside, the cold hits you like divine correction. Your breath forms a fog that merges with everyone else's, a communal offering to whatever god oversees frostbite. Some men wash their faces with snow, others rub ash instead. It's warmer, and according to legend, morally cleansing. The noble tents glow faintly again in the distance, and you realise they too are just pockets of heat trying not to disappear. It's almost democratic if you squint hard enough. You pull your cloak tight and glance back at the tent. 5 men, 1 blanket, and a miracle that somehow repeated itself through the entire winter. If there's a moral lesson here, it's probably that survival isn't bravery. It's bureaucracy, divided evenly among bodies. You head toward the campfire, boots cracking frost, and watch steam rise from the horses as the sun breaks weakly over the horizon. They look peaceful, warm, even smug. You envy them, not because they're cleaner, but because none of them have to share a blanket. At some point, every soldier realizes that warmth doesn't care who provides it. By the middle of winter, the line between man and livestock becomes largely administrative. If it has a heartbeat and produces heat, it's family. Horses were the obvious choice. They were large, dependable, and most importantly, alive. A horse's body radiates roughly the warmth of a small fireplace, and unlike most fireplaces, it only occasionally kicks you in the ribs. So soldiers began sleeping beside them, their noble steeds transformed into reluctant bunkmates. The smell took some getting used to, a heady blend of sweat, hay, leather, and the faint tang of manure, which historians might describe as earthy, but you'd call memorable. Still, once you got past the aroma, there was comfort in the shared breathing. The horses exhaled thick clouds of steam, and for a moment, the camp looked almost enchanted, a field of ghosts snorting politely into the cold. Dogs were popular too. They were smaller, warmer, and far more emotionally available. A good war dog could keep watch, chase off rats, and serve as a small, loyal furnace. They curled up beside soldiers, tucking noses under tails, occasionally stealing food and occasionally the entire blanket. No one minded. In the hierarchy of warmth, theft was a compliment. Then there were the pigs. Not glamorous, but remarkably efficient. A pig's body heat could outmatch most men. Peasants at home had long known this. Now soldiers rediscovered it with scientific enthusiasm. A man sleeping next to a pig rarely froze, though he occasionally questioned the state of his career. It's hard to feel heroic when your bedmate oinks in its sleep. The goats, meanwhile, were unpredictable. They'd share their warmth, briefly, then eat the straw you were sleeping on and chew through the tent ropes out of boredom. A medieval proverb said, "Trust a goat as you trust the weather, briefly and from a distance." You don't know if that's true, but you wake up one morning half buried under canvas and feel inclined to agree. Manure fires were the less affectionate version of animal companionship. When wood ran out, which it always did, you burned what nature provided. Dried dung made decent fuel, slow, smoky, and endlessly available. The scent wasn't ideal, but after a few days you stopped noticing it, mainly because your sense of smell had surrendered. At least the fire burned steadily, and the irony was not lost on anyone. The same animals that pulled the carts now powered the camp. Symbiosis, medieval edition. Sometimes the animals slept right inside the tents. A small goat tethered near the door, a dog by the fire, a horse's head poking through the flap like an oversized roommate. It was chaotic but strangely comforting, a mixture of snoring, snorting, and the occasional philosophical sigh. Every breath added another degree to the collective temperature. The result was humid, smelly, and undeniably alive. You remember one night in particular, a storm roaring outside, rain freezing into pellets that clattered against the tents like thrown coins. Inside, the horses shifted uneasily. Stamping and snorting, the dogs whined and everyone huddled closer. When the wind tore through the camp, you felt the animals lean against you for balance. A moment of mutual instinct. For a heartbeat. You weren't soldier and beast. You were simply mammals negotiating with the weather. By morning, the air inside the tent was so thick you could chew it. Steam rose from every surface. The floor, the straw, the soldiers, the animals themselves. It was like waking up inside a misplaced cloud. Someone joked that this must be what heaven smells like for farmers. Another corrected him. This was clearly purgatory, and the pigs were the gatekeepers. Cleaning up was its own ritual. The straw beneath the animals turned to sludge. Boots sank, and tempers followed. but no one complained seriously. They all understood the arrangement. You tolerate the mess, the animals tolerate you, and everyone tolerates the cold slightly less. That night, as you brush the frost from a horse's mane, it exhales a puff of warm air that hits your face like mercy. You pat its neck, whisper something that could almost be gratitude. The horse blinks at you, which is medieval for your welcome. In quieter moments, you realise how much the animals shape the rhythm of camp life. They mark the hours with their restlessness, the mornings with their feeding, and the nights with their patient silence. Even the officers, in their heated tents, depend on them, not for warmth directly, but for the illusion of stability. No horse, no campaign, no dog, no guard, no pig, no breakfast. The men joke that the animals are the smartest ones here. They don't fight wars, they don't write songs about dying honourably, and they never forget where the real warmth is. You think about that sometimes, how the smartest creature in camp is probably the one chewing cud in the corner. When night comes again, you settle down next to the horse, its body radiating steady heat through your cloak. The smell is strong, the straw damp, and your dignity somewhere outside the tent, probably freezing to death. But for the first time in days, you feel genuinely warm. As your eyes close, you hear the rhythmic breathing of the animals around you. A slow, heavy pulse of life shared between species. Outside, the wind keeps howling, but inside you've built something ancient and fragile. A circle of warmth held together by instinct, mud, and misplaced affection. It's not civilization exactly, but it's close enough to sleep. By now, you've accepted that cleanliness is a luxury, and like most luxuries, it belongs to people who aren't freezing. In the medieval army, filth wasn't failure, it was strategy. You call it the filth barrier, the thin, greasy line between life and frostbite. Every soldier develops one. It starts as dirt, becomes protection, and eventually evolves into a second skin with its own ecosystem, and possibly a small feudal government. The logic is simple. Washing removes heat. You wash, you shiver, you die. Therefore, not washing is practically heroic. It's the only time laziness counts as discipline. The monks, of course, encouraged this attitude long before the army adopted it. Purity, they said, was a matter of the soul, not the skin. And since most soldiers already had questionable souls, skipping the bath was practically divine compliance. Some even took it further, believing that staying dirty protected them from temptation. Because nothing kills desire faster than the smell of tactical neglect. You run your hand along your sleeve. The fabric is stiff with old smoke, sweat, and wool grease. Lanolin, the sheep's natural waterproofing, seeps into every fibre, turning your cloak into something between a raincoat and a moral compromise. It repels water beautifully, and people even better. You've stopped noticing the scent, but new arrivals can smell the veterans from a full camp away. It's the fragrance of survival, burnt wood, wet leather, and faint despair. Someone jokes that you could follow an army by smell alone. Someone else says you could also repel one that way. Both are probably true. No one bathes unless it rains. And even then, the goal is confusion, not hygiene. Soap exists, technically, but it's usually reserved for nobility or medical emergencies, which coincidentally occur at the same time. You tell yourself you'll wash after the campaign, the same way everyone promises to pray after the battle. Intent counts, or so the chaplain insists. There's an old rhyme soldiers quote whenever someone mentions bathing. Clean men die cold and dirty men die old. It's catchy, practical, and smells like truth. So you scratch, yawn, and feel smug about your longevity. Even the officers with their fancy furs and perfumes can't escape the grime. Their tents might smell like civility for the first hour, but soon the combination of smoke, sweat, and human persistence wins. No scent endures forever, except misery. Fleas and lice, ever faithful, adapt to the new environment. They move through the camp like minor nobility, entitled, unkillable, and always hungry. You learn to ignore them, the way people learn to ignore taxes. Every scratch is a reminder that you're still alive and still losing the argument. One man in your tent claims that bathing washes away luck. He swears his cousin took a full bath before a battle and was immediately struck by an arrow. Correlation, not causation, but no one volunteers to test the theory. It's not superstition if it works often enough to avoid freezing. You find comfort in the layer of grime coating your hands. It's like wearing history. Each streak of mud tells a story. The river crossing, the trench digging, the night you dropped a stew pot and called it soup anyway. You're less a person now, and more an artifact in progress. There are moments, however, when your conscience remembers civilization. You pass a stream and think about washing, but then a gust of wind cuts through your armour, and the idea dies instantly. You tell yourself the dirt is part of your uniform, and uniforms should never be out of regulation. Some soldiers rub ash on their faces in the morning, both to block the cold and, according to legend, to confuse demons. No one knows if it works, but everyone looks equally haunted, so it probably does. The grey powder mixes with sweat until the skin takes on a permanent hue of exhaustion. When you catch your reflection in a frozen puddle, you barely recognise the person staring back, but you do admire his resilience. By now, the campfire smoke has soaked into every thread you own. When you walk, you leave behind a faint trail of soot, like a moving chimney with opinions. You wonder if historians will ever smell the past correctly, or if museums will just describe it as atmospheric discomfort. The chaplain occasionally reminds the men that cleanliness is next to godliness, but even he smells like penance. You suspect the real moral hierarchy goes faith, frostbite, filth, in that order. He preaches anyway, standing near the fire, hands clasped, voice soft, and everyone nods respectfully while quietly thinking about their toes. As the night deepens, the temperature drops again. You curl up, wrapped in a cocoon of dirt, grease, and theology. Your cloak crackles when you move, proof that the filth barrier has reached its full protective maturity. You're a human candle, burning slowly, emitting equal parts heat and regret. When you finally drift towards sleep, you realise that you've become everything the medieval soldier aspired to be: unwashed, unbothered, and unreasonably alive. It's a strange kind of holiness, the kind that smells faintly of smoke and survival. Outside, the wind rattles the tents again. The horses sigh. Somewhere the chaplain coughs through his sermon to no one. You smile in the dark. If heaven has a smell, it probably isn't this, but it got you through another night, and that's close enough to salvation. In the medieval world, sleep didn't happen all at once. It arrived in installments. Historians later called it segmented sleep. You call it the world's worst subscription plan. The first act begins just after midnight. You lie down, wrapped in your smoky cloak, surrounded by snoring, shifting comrades and the faint, constant breath of animals. The camp is half asleep, not resting, just paused. Firelight flickers on the tent walls, casting shadows that look almost human until they move in ways people shouldn't. You close your eyes. The straw crunches beneath you. Your body, exhausted but suspicious, decides to rest in shifts. Your mind drifts. Your limbs stay alert. Somewhere between thought and dream, you hear the slow rhythm of breathing all around you. An orchestra of survival playing softly in smoke and mud. Half an hour later, you're awake again. Everyone is. The fire needs tending, the horses need checking, and the cold has crept back in like a bored intruder. It's time for the interval. No one complains. No one speaks. You simply rise together, a quiet army of ghosts rehearsing for morning. This is the hour monks call matins, the time for prayers, reflection, and mild hypothermia. The chaplain lights a small candle, shielding the flame with his hand as if protecting a fragile soul. He mutters scripture into the dark, voice trembling with devotion and frost. Some men join him, whispering through chattering teeth. Others just stare at the embers, thinking about food or warmth, or both. Faith and fatigue share the same silence. You kneel near the fire, stir the ash gently to reveal a faint red glow. The banked embers from earlier, still breathing under their grey disguise. With a few careful puffs, they awaken, stretching into small, fragile flames that immediately demand more attention than you can afford. You feed them dry straw and fragments of last night's plans. The warmth returns, brief but merciful. For a moment, you almost understand why people write hymns. Someone coughs, someone else laughs, quietly, at nothing in particular. Sleep deprivation does that. It turns absurdity into intimacy. The line between prayer and delirium blurs. You could be blessing the fire or just begging it to behave. After a while, the camp settles again. The candle burns low, the flames shrink to embers once more, and the second act begins. You return to your straw bed, slightly warmer, slightly more philosophical. Everyone moves carefully, as though afraid to disturb the delicate balance of exhaustion that passes for peace. You pull your hood tighter, close your eyes, and let your breathing match the rhythm of the fire's last crackles. The second sleep is deeper. It arrives like surrender, quiet and inevitable. Dreams slip in through the cracks in reason. You dream of home, though in dreams, home looks suspiciously like your tent, only cleaner and with fewer hoofprints. Sometimes you dream of food, bread that isn't frozen, stew that isn't theoretical. Other nights, it's fire. Huge, impossible, warm enough to melt the world. You wake just before it burns you, which feels thematically appropriate. Outside, the camp lives its own nocturnal rhythm. Watchmen patrol the perimeter, boots crunching in rhythm with the wind. Horses shift and snort softly, their breath steaming into the dark like offerings to a patient god. The night itself seems alive, breathing, creaking, whispering secrets you're too tired to remember. Inside, the tent holds the last traces of warmth. The smell of smoke has become a lullaby, thick, comforting, almost maternal. It fills your lungs like memory, ancient, shared, and faintly toxic. There's a strange peace in this halfway world between waking and sleep. You're not quite alive, not quite dreaming, just floating in the quiet space where effort stops mattering. For a few hours, nothing exists beyond the straw, the fire, and the slow beating of your own heart beneath layers of dirt and wool. You've learned that the cold isn't your enemy, it's your tutor. It teaches humility, patience, and the ability to lower expectations until survival feels like success. It teaches you that comfort is an illusion, and illusions, when properly believed, are warm. When the first grey light creeps through the tent flap, the second sleep ends abruptly, as if dismissed. The men stir, groaning softly. No one looks rested, but everyone looks present, which is a kind of miracle. You stretch your hands toward the faint heat of the rekindled fire. The world smells of smoke and ash and something almost hopeful. Outside, the wind has softened, as though the night has finally accepted defeat. The chaplain gives a final prayer, voice hoarse. "Thank you, Lord, for another morning, and if it's not too much trouble, could you make this one slightly less educational?" A few men chuckle quietly, the kind of laughter that costs no energy but keeps morale alive. You join them because humour, like fire, is one of the few things that still burns clean. As the camp begins to stir, you realise something oddly comforting. For all the misery, the smoke, the filth, and the frostbite, you have somehow slept. Not well, not peacefully, but enough to continue pretending that tomorrow is possible, and that, in medieval terms, counts as victory. You wake because something touched your face. It's the tent wall, stiff, brittle, and faintly glittering in the light of dying embers. You blink and realise it's covered in frost. Your breath has been painting all night, and the result is a masterpiece of freezing condensation. Each exhale hangs in the air a little longer now, a pale ghost reluctant to leave. Even your sigh crystallises before it hits the ground. It's the only art form the army consistently produces. The inside of the tent sparkles faintly, ice blooming along every seam, turning canvas into lacework. If you weren't inside it, you might call it beautiful. Instead, you call it personal betrayal. The cold no longer feels like air. It's solid now, thick enough to bump into. You wave your hand in front of your face and feel resistance, as if the night itself has turned into glass. Someone nearby mutters, "The air's solid enough to insult you back." You don't laugh, but you do agree. Every sound is sharp, metallic. The leather straps on your armour creak like old doors. Canvas pops softly as ice shifts under tension. Somewhere outside, a horse snorts, the sound shattering the quiet like a warning shot. You lie still, listening to the frozen world breathe. The cold has its own rhythm, a faint crack here, a snap there, like the sound of patience breaking. Each small movement feels exaggerated, as though your body has become a noisy inconvenience. The man next to you coughs once and goes quiet again. You can see the frost forming on his beard in real time, small white crystals spreading like mould on bread. He looks strangely peaceful, which is how you know it's probably not a good sign. You reach out and nudge him. He grumbles faintly, so that's all right. You've developed a system. If they curse, they're alive. If they apologise, they're not. You pull your cloak tighter. It's stiff with frozen grease and soot, a brittle cocoon that crackles when you move. The lanolin has hardened into waxy ridges. Your own breath fogs your vision for a moment, then freezes on your eyelashes, turning the act of blinking into a mild exercise. Someone swears quietly, then louder, as the reality of being awake sinks in. The fire's gone out again. It's just a black hole surrounded by men pretending it isn't their turn to fix it. You all stare at it as if sheer disappointment might rekindle it. Finally, one brave soul crawls over, breaks the crust of ash, and exhales into the pit like a hopeful god. A few sparks flare up, orange veins pulsing weakly in the grey. The camp watches, silently rooting for combustion. It's the closest thing to drama anyone has energy for. For a moment, the embers glow, casting soft light on the tent walls. The frost gleams red, each crystal catching the fire like a stained glass window dedicated to survival. You stare at it until your eyes ache from beauty and fatigue in equal measure. Then the light fades again. The fire loses interest. You lie back down. There's an old superstition that frost is alive, that it listens, that it spreads faster when you curse it. You test the theory by swearing once, very politely. Nothing changes. Apparently the frost isn't easily offended. You think about monks in stone cloisters, praying through nights colder than this, barefoot on frozen floors, still managing to call it discipline. You admire them briefly, then remember they had walls. Sleep refuses to return, so you watch your breath instead. In, out, cloud, vanish. It's proof that you exist. A simple equation. Breath. Life. And in this cold, every exhale feels like a receipt. The man on your left murmurs something in his sleep, a mixture of prayer and nonsense. You catch fragments. Warmth. Mother. Bread. You pretend not to hear. It's better that way. No one wants witnesses in their dreams. You shift slightly and feel a small, sharp sting. Ice on the straw mat piercing through your cloak. You press down, breaking it, and hear the faintest crackle, like glass cracking in slow motion. You tell yourself it's just the frost. It's easier than wondering what else might be breaking. Outside, the wind starts again. Low, endless, mournful. It weaves through the tents, making the ropes hum like distant instruments. The sound rises and falls, a cold lullaby composed entirely of geography. For a moment, you let yourself drift with it. It's too cold for real sleep, but drifting counts. Your mind hovers somewhere between thought and numbness, quietly admiring the efficiency of suffering. You realise that the frost isn't the enemy. It's the record keeper, preserving every mistake, every footprint, every breath. Tomorrow, when the sun hits, it'll all melt into mud again, erasing the proof that you were here. But tonight, for a few frozen hours, the world remembers you exactly as you are, tired, alive, and outlined in ice. You close your eyes, feeling your breath condense against the hood of your cloak. It freezes there too. It's fine. You've learned to take comfort in small permanence. Somewhere behind you, the frost crackles softly, a sound almost like laughter, and you're too tired to wonder whose. You discover that the night has a schedule and none of it was negotiated with you. Sometime after the frost finishes decorating the tent and before the stars get bored, the watch bell thuds. Men rise in pieces, not awake, not asleep, just vertical enough to argue with gravity. It's your turn to mind the embers. You crawl toward the fire pit like a pilgrim visiting a very small saint. The ashes grey and domed, a soft grave covering whatever warmth survived your previous optimism. You brush it open with 2 fingers, and there it is, a red eye, unimpressed but willing. This is the liturgy of the camp. Bank, breathe, feed, believe. Someone hands you a twist of dry straw. It crackles like parchment confession. You hold it to the ember and exhale slowly, the way the chaplain told you to exhale your sins. A thread of flame appears, nervous but curious, and then remembers its fire. It climbs the straw, licks your knuckles, and you withdraw with the ceremonial hiss of a man preserving dignity and fingerprints. Holiness, someone whispers behind you, is measured in burnt eyebrows. You would laugh, but your eyes are watering devoutly. Around the pit, other figures hover, men in cloaks, faces half lit, all of you officiants at the Church of Not Freezing to Death. You pass small sticks as if receiving communion in reverse. The flame steadies, becomes a low, proper thing, the sort of flame that says, "I won't leave if you don't." You listen. Wind thrums the ropes. A horse stamps twice like a skeptical congregant. Far off, the river clicks under ice, practicing its vowels. The camp's noises are gentler at this hour. Even misery has indoor voice. A watchman shuffles past, mail whispering against wool. You trade nods, the nightly version of a yawn. He mutters the time by the old method. 2 hours till the world pretends to begin again. You accept this as astronomy. The chaplain materializes with a candle cupped in both hands, its flame flickering like a rumour that refuses to die. He kneels near the brazier and murmurs matins. You don't catch the words, but the cadence is familiar. A slow braid of hunger, gratitude, and negotiation. Monks do this behind stone. You do it behind canvas. Both call it discipline. Yours smells like smoke. The fire-banking ritual repeats in small circles across the camp, little red hearts beating under blankets of ash. Each pit has a custodian, a man who remembers how it almost went out last night, and how it didn't this time because he stayed and believed and burned his sleeve. Faith, you realise, is mostly persistence plus singe marks. You poke the coals and they answer with a soft collapse, glowing brighter as they fall together. You envy their teamwork. Men require speeches to do that. Someone nods off on his heels, chin tucked to chest, hands extended to the heat like a supplicant statue. You nudge him before he kisses the flame. He wakes with the universal soldier's apology. A blink, a grunt, a professional attempt at pretending it was on purpose. He takes your place, and you take his, both of you keeping the fire alive by scheduled embarrassment. Every now and then an ember slips out and skitters onto the straw. You pounce like a cat with mortgages. The tent does not burn. This counts as leadership. A thin thread of chant drifts from another circle. Not Latin exactly, but something adjacent. Old field hymns about bread, luck, and finding your way home without your toes. It isn't pretty, but it's warmer than silence. Men hum when conversation costs too much. Between breaths you drift. Not sleep, drift. Your mind detaches like a cautious scout and wanders around the firelight. You imagine a forge, iron softening, sparks arcing. You imagine summer, grass burned yellow, water scandalously liquid. The images heat your face for half a heartbeat, and then hand you back to the present like a cooled coin. The chaplain finishes his prayer with a soft amen that sounds like a truce. He blesses the brazier with 2 fingers, burns one of them, and accepts theology's refund policy without complaint. Discipline through sleeplessness, he says, mostly to the smoke. You nod. Whatever keeps the ember breathing. When the wood is steady and the ash draped just so, you unroll the ritual's last step, the cover. You pull a crust of grey over the red, leaving tiny vents like nostrils. Banking, they call it. Tucking in, you decide. It feels like caring for something that will never write you a letter but might keep you alive. Outside the tent flap, the sky's a black wool hood with frost stitched into it. If you look too long, the stars begin to shuffle into patterns that aren't constellations so much as suggestions. You close the flap before the night suggests anything else. Back inside, the men have settled into those lopsided heaps that pass for geometry. You step carefully, an archaeologist among ruins that snore. You find your place at the edge, the draft line, the honour wall, the cold end of virtue. The fire gives one contented crack. It is, for now, persuaded. You pull the cloak over your head and watch the world through a small horseshoe of fabric. The canvas above is pale with frost. The air around your mouth is a small private weather. Your hands still hold the smell of ash and fresh heat. The scent is strangely holy, like a monastery with worse ventilation. Just before sleep catches your ankle, the wind presses the tent wall in and the frost prints your cheek through the cloth. A cold benediction from the parish of winter. You accept it. You've been confirmed in harsher churches. Someone whispers, "Wake me if it dies." You murmur, "It won't," with the confidence of a man who knows the future for the next 20 minutes. Outside, a watch bell thuds again, somewhere else. Someone else's problem. You close your eyes and see the ember anyway. A red pupil under ash, unblinking. It watches the night so you don't have to. You let it keep the vigil. Sleep arrives on quiet feet, and you surrender the hour to the small god you fed, trusting it to breathe until the world remembers how. The second watch fades into the slowest hour of the night, the hour that doesn't belong to anyone. It's too late to be yesterday, too early to be tomorrow, and just cold enough to make you question theology. This is when the prayers begin. Not because anyone's feeling holy, but because in the dark, imagination fills the gaps that faith can't reach. You hear it first from the chaplain, his voice thin and tired, whispering Latin into his sleeve so it won't freeze. Then another joins in, mumbling words that aren't in any scripture you've read but carry the same intent. Please, not tonight. Soon the tent hums softly, a mix of devotion, superstition, and exhausted bargaining. It's not quite a choir, more like an agreement between the living and whatever might be listening. You add your own contribution, a short private prayer that starts piously and ends in logistics. If you die, may it be quietly, with both boots on, preferably after breakfast. A reasonable request, though you doubt heaven's taking notes at this hour. Everyone prays differently. One man stares at the frost on the tent roof as if counting his sins. Another crosses himself repeatedly, as if volume might compensate for doubt. Someone whispers to a locket, probably a wife, possibly a saint. The details don't matter. In this kind of cold, faith is just hope wearing a coat. After prayers comes stillness. Not peace, just stillness. The kind that arrives when bodies run out of ways to complain. The fire glows faintly through the layer of ash you banked earlier. It looks smaller now, but somehow more sincere. You watch it for a long time, not sure whether you're meditating or hallucinating. They say the devil walks at this hour, but he'd need a warmer cloak than yours. You figure hell probably looks like a cozy inn compared to this. Still, the thought keeps you awake. You remember stories told by older soldiers, demons that sat on sleeping men's chests, stealing their breath in the night. Monks called it incubus. You call it someone else's problem. Sleep creeps closer anyway. You drift halfway, eyes open just enough to mistake movement in the shadows. For a moment you swear the frost patterns on the tent wall shift, thin lines of ice forming shapes that look too deliberate to be random. Faces maybe, or just the mind inventing company. It's hard to tell the difference. Dreams arrive like uninvited guests, not gentle, not coherent, just there. One moment you're beside the campfire, the next you're home, your mother's bread warm in your hands, the smell so real it hurts. You take a bite and wake to the taste of wool and ash. Your stomach growls in fluent blasphemy. Around you the others twitch and mutter. Dreams are communal here. Every shuffle of straw, every sigh is someone's subconscious trying to make sense of the cold. You hear snippets of sentences, half prayers, half nightmares. One man calls out a name and goes silent again. Another laughs quietly in his sleep. You envy him. A good dream is the only entertainment the medieval army can't ration. The chaplain says dreams are divine messages. The doctor says they're indigestion. Both might be right. Your last meal was something between stew and accident. The fire pops, snapping you awake again. The sound echoes like punctuation in the quiet. You stare into the embers and see shapes there too. Tiny landscapes of red hills and glowing valleys. It feels almost sacred, watching light survive its own death. You think of saints who saw visions in candles, and you decide that hallucination must be the sincerest form of prayer. Someone wakes suddenly, gasping. A bad dream, or a good memory misfiring. He looks around, confused, then laughs softly to himself. It was warm, he says. No one answers. There's nothing to add. You lie back down, the straw whispering under you, the canvas breathing softly above. Your thoughts wander again, uninvited but relentless. If there are demons, you think they're probably cold too. Maybe they come to borrow heat, not souls. A small comfort, but you'll take it. You close your eyes and drift once more. This time you dream of sunlight, that strange, distant phenomenon from before the campaign. In the dream, it touches your face and doesn't hurt. You wake smiling, which surprises you. The chaplain is still whispering prayers nearby, the same lines on repeat, like a lullaby sung by someone who never expects an answer. His candle has nearly burned the base. The last inch of wax tilts, melts onto his glove, and he doesn't even flinch. He just keeps murmuring. You wonder how many centuries of nights like this have existed. Men and monks, all whispering into darkness, hoping that something kind is listening. It's almost comforting to think misery is traditional. You turn over, facing the dim light of the brazier, and whisper a final thought before sleep wins. Please let tomorrow be less educational. Outside, the wind carries the prayer away, folds it into the sound of ropes creaking and frost settling. No reply comes, which, in this century, counts as mercy. You've made peace with a lot of things in this war. The cold, the mud, the fact that your blanket smells like a moral dilemma. But the lice are personal. They arrived early in the campaign and never left. They pay no rent, obey no hierarchy, and attend no sermons. If medieval life were a democracy, they'd be running it. Everyone has them. Knights, squires, peasants, priests. The lice respect no titles. In a way, they're the purest form of equality Europe has ever seen. You find that strangely comforting. Also itchy. The tent has gone quiet except for the soft rhythmic scratching, a kind of nocturnal orchestra. Each man plays his instrument: sleeve, beard, boot top, scalp. The sound is oddly calming once you stop noticing what it is, a steady percussion of survival. Somewhere near the centre of the tent, a man sighs like he's tuning his section. No one talks about it, of course. You simply accept that at some point in the night, everyone's hand will wander to the same place. Etiquette says nothing about this. Chivalry is suspiciously silent. You suspect even saints itched. The chaplain once tried to interpret the infestation theologically. He said it was a test of humility, God's way of reminding men they are dust, and dust is very mobile. He said this while scratching under his collar. The lesson landed beautifully. Once a week, the camp attempts delousing. You strip to your linens, hold your shirt near the fire, and watch the seams snap, crackle, and pop. It's strangely satisfying. A barbecue of vengeance. The air fills with the unmistakable smell of singed hair and justice. Smoke curls through the tent like incense for the Church of Itch. Someone calls it smoke delousing therapy. Someone else calls it Wednesday. The firelight flickers across your forearm, illuminating the battlefield of your skin. Tiny red marks, faint lines, evidence of nightly campaigns fought without glory. You scratch again, slowly, rhythmically. It's not relief, it's participation. One man jokes that his lice have names now, old comrades he can rely on. Another replies that his are unionized. Laughter ripples softly through the dark, half amusement, half surrender. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. When you're too tired to scratch, you simply negotiate. You tell yourself the lice are warmth that moves. You tell yourself they're company. You tell yourself anything, really. The body will believe any story that keeps it still. The loneliness creeps in between scratches. It doesn't feel dramatic, just large, slow, and patient. You think of home, the quiet sound of wind through wood shutters, a bed that didn't rustle unless you asked it to. Memory feels like luxury now, too clean to be believable. You turn your head toward the tent wall where the frost glows faintly from the firelight outside. It's beautiful in a detached, slightly malicious way. Each ice crystal catches the light like a tiny halo, mocking you with its purity. You admire it anyway. Behind you, someone whispers a story about a woman who carried a relic of St. Benedict and never had lice again. The men groan softly, not from disbelief, but from envy. Someone mutters, "St. Benedict can keep his miracle. I'll take a comb." You suspect that's heresy, but no one reports it. In this cold, all sins are downgraded to misdemeanors. The scratching resumes. A boot squeaks, someone coughs, and the fire crackles in sympathy. It's not peace exactly, but it's close. The kind of calm that comes when everyone's too tired to be miserable properly. You stare at the ceiling and think about how many generations of men have done this. Frozen, filthy, itchy, and alive. Somewhere in the future, historians will write about bravery, about tactics and banners and noble causes. You hope they include the part about how heroism smelled. Eventually you drift towards sleep again, half scratching, half dreaming. In the dream, the lice grow enormous. They carry torches, march in neat ranks, and salute you as their general. You wake in terror, then laugh quietly. It's nice to be respected somewhere. The fire sinks low, the smoke thickens, and the air turns dense with that peculiar blend of wool, ash, and humanity. Someone near the flap hums a few notes of an old tavern song. No one joins in, but everyone listens. It's the sound of home translated through exhaustion. You reach for your sleeve again, but stop halfway. Let them be, you decide. They've earned their share of the warmth. You close your eyes. The tent rustles gently in the wind. The frost gleams faintly, and the scratching fades into the background hum of existence. It's disgusting, It's absurd, it's life, and somehow it's enough to make you sleep. By the time the next night arrives, the cold has stopped pretending to be weather. It has become a philosophy, simple, persuasive, impossible to argue with. You wrap yourself in everything you own and still feel disgust rather than covered. There's a moment each winter campaign when the men stop talking about if they'll freeze and start talking about who will. It's not cruel, it's arithmetic. Warmth, like faith, is finite and unevenly distributed. You pull your cloak tighter. It cracks slightly where grease is frozen into armour. The air is so sharp it feels manufactured. Every breath stings, every exhale rings. You could whistle and produce glass. The fire gives up first. You watch its last glow fade into a dull red eye, then a smear, then nothing. No one bothers to relight it. You all just watch the darkness solidify and decide that's close enough to efficiency. The frost creeps back in, taking possession of every surface. Canvas stiffens, ropes turn to rods, water skins bulge with ice. Your blanket makes a faint snapping noise when you unfold. It's like tucking yourself in with a frozen flag. Someone near you whispers a prayer. It's short, maybe just a name, maybe just a noise. At this hour, even God must appreciate brevity. A soldier across the tent mutters, "Don't fall asleep." Another answers, "Then what's the point of lying down?" The first man doesn't reply. He's already drifted somewhere quieter. You think of the monks again, barefoot in their stone cloisters, reciting psalms in the same temperature as punishment. They called it devotion, you call it training. They'd be proud of you if they hadn't all frozen centuries ago. The chaplain sits upright near the embers, his candle long gone, muttering verses from memory. You can't hear the words, only the rhythm, a steady murmur against the wind like someone arguing politely with eternity. He once told you that sleep could be dangerous, that giving in to comfort was a sin of softness. You suspect holiness is easier to preach when your cloak has lining. Still, his theory lingers in the mind. Maybe the saints didn't freeze because they refused to rest. Maybe exhaustion is the body's way of confessing. You close your eyes anyway. If this is sin, at least it's warm for a minute. The cold seeps in through seams and thoughts. Your fingertips lose their ambition first, then your feet, then the parts of you that used to argue about meaning. You can feel yourself shrinking, not dying, just condensing into something smaller, quieter, easier to store. Someone outside coughs once loudly, then again, then stops. You listen for the third cough. It never comes. The silence afterward is so clean it almost sparkles. Even the lice seem to pause out of respect. You lie still, counting heartbeats that sound slower than usual, and wonder if this is what peace was supposed to feel like. It's not unpleasant, just very thorough. In the distance, a horse shifts, snorts, and the sound ripples through the camp like proof of concept. If the animals are alive, so are you. That's the rule, as scientific as anything written since. The chaplain's voice drifts through the canvas. Blessed are those who endure. You're not sure whether he means the living or the frozen, possibly both. When the frost reaches your nose, you breathe slower to avoid breaking it. The air inside the tent tastes metallic, as though you're inhaling the ghost of your armour. Your eyelids grow heavy, not with sleep, but with gravity's final suggestion. In your half-dream, you're back home. A warm bed, sunlight, bread, the usual propaganda. Your mother's voice says something you can't hear. You lean closer and the voice becomes wind again. The illusion breaks. Reality reasserts itself politely. Someone nearby murmurs, "He's gone." You don't look. In this camp, looking has never changed the result. The body will be moved at dawn, rolled gently in canvas, a quiet subtraction from the census of warmth. You pull the blanket higher and tell yourself it's just another night. That's what survival really is, a long series of just another nights. You plan to wake in the morning, though planning feels ambitious. Outside, the stars glitter like shards of frozen breath, so sharp and clear they seem almost close. For a moment you imagine reaching one, feeling its light melt the frost from your fingers. You smile at the stupidity of the thought. Then again, stupidity has been keeping you alive for weeks. Somewhere far off, maybe from the village below, a church bell rings. Thin, hesitant, its sound bending through the cold. It's either morning or someone else's miracle. Either way, it means the night is ending. The frost softens, the tent ropes groan, the wind sighs, briefly out of breath. You sit up slowly, the blanket cracking around you like old parchment, and you realise the cold hasn't vanished. It's just grown tired. You survived, not because you were brave, but because the cold got bored first, and in this century that counts as divine mercy. You don't wake up so much as thaw into existence. Morning isn't a moment, it's a slow negotiation between you and physics. At first you think you're dead, then a joint moves somewhere in the distance, and you realise death would have been quieter. The first thing you feel is weight, your cloak, your armour, your mistakes, pressing down like a well-meaning relative. The second thing you feel is pain. That's good. It means you still qualify as alive. You open your eyes to find the tent glowing faintly. A thin beam of light slips through a tear in the canvas, catching on frost crystals that glitter like bad jewellery. For a moment, it's almost beautiful. Then one of the crystals melts and drips on your face. Morning dew, the earth's polite reminder that you're not special. You try to stretch, but your body disagrees. Your boots have frozen in the shape of ambition. Your legs feel sculpted from hardwood, and when you finally manage to bend a knee, it sounds like medieval carpentry. You rotate your shoulders, and a sound like snapping parchment echoes inside your armour. You've become your own relic, venerated, immobile, and slightly damp. Someone groans nearby, a long, low note of collective suffering that harmonises beautifully with the creak of leather and the crunch of straw. The camp is waking, one complaint at a time. It's not cheerful, but it's rhythmic. You sit up slowly. The inside of the tent glows pale gold where sunlight hits the frost, and the walls shimmer as it melts. Tiny droplets form and run downward, a slow applause for your continued existence. Steam rises from your breath, mingling with the faint smoke still clinging to your clothes. You smell like a fireplace that recently gave up. Outside, someone curses as his boot refuses to cooperate. Another voice answers, "Leave it. It's part of you now." You decide to keep. Your own on, not out of strength, but to avoid the paperwork of finding your toes. Your fingers don't bend right either. You rub them together until the skin burns, then slap them against your thighs to remind them what circulation was. The sting hurts, but the pain feels productive, like warming up for a day of disappointment. The chaplain walks by the tent flap, his breath clouding the air, his voice low but resolute. "The Lord has granted us another dawn," someone mutters, and promptly regretted it. Even faith sounds tired at this hour. You crawl toward the fire pit, a black crater filled with yesterday's hope. You poke at the ash, find one stubborn ember still clinging to life, and blow gently. It brightens for a second, then dies with theatrical dignity. Fine. You didn't need warmth, you had sarcasm. Sunlight creeps across the camp, and everything begins to steam. Tents, armour, men. It's as if the entire army is sighing in unison, evaporating the night's evidence. The frost on the ground melts unevenly, creating slick patches of mud that gleam like false promises. You stand, wobble, and call it balance. Across the rows of tents, soldiers emerge like badly resurrected saints, wrapped in blankets, blinking, each one discovering a new muscle that refuses to cooperate. It's a communal resurrection, 1,000 men reanimated by sheer irritation. A few start singing quietly, not songs of victory, just fragments of tavern tunes remembered by tired throats. The melody wobbles, somewhere between prayer and complaint, but it keeps the air from feeling empty. You catch sight of your reflection in a frozen puddle. It's an unflattering portrait. Pale face, cracked lips, eyes half open. The frost has outlined your beard in white, as if you're auditioning for the role of winter's exhausted intern. Still, you nod to yourself. It's an honest look. Someone yells for help with a buckle frozen shut. Another tries to pour water from a skin that's solid ice. Every small task becomes a shared farce. It's strangely unifying. A sense that if no one can do anything properly, then maybe everything's fine. A faint warmth finally brushes your cheek. The first direct touch of sunlight in days. It feels foreign, like kindness from a stranger. You close your eyes, let it rest there, and remember that the sky still works even when everything else doesn't. You glance around and see it everywhere. The slow shimmer of frost turning to mist. The grey canvas glowing soft gold. The faint halo of steam rising from every moving shape. For the first time, the camp looks alive, not haunted. You realise the miracle isn't that anyone slept, but that anyone woke up at all. Someone laughs quietly, a real laugh this time. Short, surprised, sincere. The sound travels, catches on the wind, and a few others join in. You don't even need to know the joke. The laugh itself is enough. It's the sound of human arrogance, refusing to die. You pull your cloak around your shoulders, look at the pale horizon, and mutter the oldest truth in any army. We're still here. And for the first time, the words don't sound like surrender. They sound like beginning. You can tell it's breakfast because people start chewing louder than they talk. No one looks happy about it, but everyone participates, the same way they participate in suffering or marching. It's tradition, and tradition doesn't taste good either. The menu hasn't changed since yesterday, or the century before that. Bread, if you can call it that, and ale pretending to be soup. The bread could double as armour plating. You hit it once against your knee. It wins, you bite anyway. Your teeth protest in fluent Latin. The crust flakes into a fine dust which immediately freezes mid-air. It tastes like cold ambition and past decisions. Someone jokes that if you soak it in ale long enough it becomes edible. Someone else says that if you soak yourself in ale long enough, you stop caring either way. Both strategies have strong followings. The beer is a new experience every morning. Today it's half frozen, a refreshing slush of barley and regret. You take a cautious sip. It burns slightly, not from alcohol, but from the sensation of drinking something colder than honesty. Nutrition optional, calories mandatory. The chaplain blesses the meal out of habit. His breath fogs the air with holiness, or possibly steam. Smoke flavour, he says with faint irony, courtesy of last night's fire. The men nod solemnly, not out of reverence, but to avoid wasting energy on chewing while listening. Across the camp, small fires flicker back to life, each one surrounded by men crouched like philosophers. They hold their hands over the flames, warming fingers before dipping crusts into ale or stew that doesn't meet legal definitions of either. The smell is half smoke, half ambition. Comforting if you don't think too hard about the ingredients. A man unwraps a scrap of salted pork he's been hoarding. It's grey, thin, and revered like scripture. He slices it carefully, offering small pieces to the nearest faces. No one thanks him. Gratitude wastes time. They just nod, chew, and blink slowly like reptiles in the sun. This is community. You notice the quiet choreography of it all. The way spoons clink against wooden bowls in imperfect unison, the faint sound of fire popping, the occasional groan of someone discovering their food still frozen in the middle. It's domesticity, performed at siege temperature. You pull your share of bread closer to the flames, holding it so near that the edge starts to smoke. Perfect. Medieval toast. You blow on it, pretending you're a nobleman with options. The first bite is crunchy and vaguely encouraging. Someone remarks that soldiers in warmer climates eat fruit for breakfast. Everyone stops chewing to glare. The man immediately rephrases, "But fruit is overrated." Peace restored. The ale passes from hand to hand, each sip leaving behind the faint taste of tin and mutual understanding. When it reaches you again, it's warmer, which feels suspiciously like friendship. There's talk of food superstition, that eating facing north offends the wind, or that sharing salt binds your souls in eternity. You wonder if sharing beer counts. If so, you're now spiritually attached to half the army, and most of them snore. The chaplain coughs politely. "Be grateful," he says, "for not all who hunger wake." No one argues, but the sentiment gets quietly rewritten in everyone's head. Be grateful, but chew faster before it freezes again. You finish the bread, a victory you will remember mainly through dental pain. The ale slush has gone too, leaving a faint crust of foam and satisfaction. You wipe your mouth with a sleeve that smells of smoke, ash, and a faint whisper of roasted lice from last night's fire. Breakfast of champions, technically. Around you, the camp begins to move. Men stretch, belch quietly, and compare the hardness of their rations like scholars comparing evidence. Someone claims his bread once deflected an arrow. No one doubts it. You look at yours and consider filing it as a weapon. The horses snort impatiently. Steam rises from their flanks, and the smell of hay mixes with human fatigue in the morning air. It's almost pleasant, in the same way surviving a near disaster is almost fun. A pot tips over near the fire, spilling grey liquid into the mud. No one wastes it. A soldier scoops it back in with a piece of bark. Recycling existed long before civilization claimed credit. You stare into your cup and see the last bit of beer shimmering in the light. It's not much, just a few bubbles, a reflection of pale sky, and the faint scent of burnt barley. You raise it slightly toward nothing in particular, a small toast to improbable continuity. The ale is gone before the thought finishes forming. For a few moments you sit in silence. The world is grey but moving. Frost still clings to the edges of tents, but the steam rising from fires gives the illusion of a life returning. You feel it too, faint, reluctant, but real. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from food, just from being surrounded by other people doing the same stupid, miraculous thing, continuing. You stand, brush off crumbs, and stretch until your back sounds like a bag of walnuts. The day has begun again. It doesn't ask for enthusiasm, only attendance. You look at the frozen sky, exhale, and mutter, "Well, breakfast could have been worse." No one answers, but several men nod. That counts as consensus. No one announces it, but everyone knows it's time to move again. The sun is barely up, low and cold, a decorative object in the sky. Men shuffle through mud like resurrected statues, trying to remember which part of their body bends first. Somewhere, a trumpet wheezes the official sound of collective reluctance. You stare at your tent, a miracle of engineering when erected, a moral puzzle when dismantled. The ropes are frozen stiff, white with frost, each knot a small sculpture of defiance. The canvas itself feels like slate. It folds only under legal threat. Someone says, "All right, men, teamwork." That's the cue for immediate chaos. 5 men, 10 opinions, 1 frozen rope. Each knot requires a strategy, a prayer, and occasionally a small knife disguised as faith. You kneel, exhale warm breath onto the nearest knot. It doesn't respond, but you pretend it softens out of respect. For a moment you feel like a craftsman, an artist of patience and futility. Then your breath freezes to the rope and you pull away with an audible crack. Progress. The chaplain passes by, still muttering about providence. You envy his theology. It has better gloves. He says the morning air is invigorating. You nod politely while wondering how to weaponize his optimism. The first tent finally collapses, not gracefully, but all at once, a heavy sigh of canvas and accumulated damp. It buries 2 men and most of their dignity. They emerge laughing weakly, which in this climate counts as gratitude. All around the camp, similar scenes unfold, tents deflating, ropes snapping, poles protesting. The soundscape is a symphony of effort. Wood creaks, leather groans, ice shatters in applause. It's messy, but it's motion, and that's what matters. You move to roll the tent canvas, but the edges are frozen solid. You and another soldier grip opposite sides and pull until something gives. You're not sure if it's the ice or your spine. Either way, you count it as a shared victory. Steam rises from your breath, curling against the pale sunlight like ghosts trying to return to their bodies. Your fingers sting, then tingle, then go pleasantly numb. The body's quiet way of filing a complaint you'll never read. A horse snorts behind you, impatient. You glance back and see it stomping in the frost, its breath forming 2 thick plumes like judgment. The animals always look ready long before the humans. It's either intelligence or better fur. Someone swears as another rope refuses to cooperate. Someone else recommends prayer. Someone else recommends fire. You compromise by glaring at it. The rope remains unmoved, a theologian in chord form. The officers call out in practiced tones of frustration, "Faster! Efficiently!" You nod respectfully while continuing at exactly the same pace. Medieval efficiency is measured in size per minute. Finally, the last tent folds. The camp looks briefly civilized. Neat piles of canvas, orderly rows of poles, 1,000 small victories of coordination. Then someone trips over a stake and faceplants into a frozen puddle, and civilization reverts to the mean. You take a moment to look around. The ground where your tent stood is darker now, a rectangle of thawed mud steaming faintly in the light. It looks like a ghost bed, a memory already evaporating. You find that comforting. Temporary suffering is the only kind that ends. Nearby, 2 soldiers argue about how to pack the canvas roll. One insists on folding, the other believes in chaos theory. You watch them reach a compromise that satisfies no one but the mud. When everything's finally loaded, the fires are stamped out, leaving little black craters smouldering quietly. Smoke trails upward, thin and grey, catching the sunlight like slow-moving incense. The smell is familiar, a mix of ash, wool, and weary competence. It's the scent of departure. You glance back at what was, an hour ago, a settlement, a village of misery with its own economy, hierarchy, and lice. Now it's just a field again. The snow glitters in the footprints, each one slowly filling with meltwater, each one erasing the evidence of collective existence. You tie the last rope to your pack, the knot tight and clumsy, a small monument to persistence. Your fingers ache, but the ache is warm, and warmth, at this point, counts as a theological experience. A voice calls, "Ready!" No one really is, but the word travels through the camp anyway, a contagion of obedience. Men line up, horses snort, and the quiet before motion feels oddly holy. You take one last look at the steaming ground, the faint smoke still rising where your fire once was. There's something noble about a place that holds no grudge. You leave it exactly as you found it, frozen, inconvenient, and mildly offended. The order comes. You shoulder your pack, feel the straps bite into your shoulders, and step forward into the day. The mud grips your boots, the frost glints off the tips of spears, and the sound of creaking leather blends with the rhythm of slow determination. Breaking camp, you realise, is less about leaving and more about admitting you stayed. Marching begins the way every bad idea begins, quietly, confidently, and with everyone pretending they volunteered. The ground, once frozen and polite, has thawed just enough to betray you. Mud sucks at your boots with the intimacy of old debt. Each step is an act of negotiation. You lift one foot, the earth disagrees, and you both compromise halfway. The sound is everywhere, Squelch, drag, sigh. An accidental orchestra of exhaustion. The air smells of damp leather, horse breath, and mild despair. Steam rises from the column of men like incense from a congregation that's late for everything. You keep your eyes on the back of the soldier ahead. He keeps his eyes on the back of the soldier ahead of him. Somewhere at the front, someone probably knows where you're going. It's best not to check. Belief is warmer than facts. The chaplain walks near the centre, muttering prayers that sound suspiciously like inventory. Every so often he glances upward, as though checking to see whether heaven is still open for business. You envy his consistency. He never slows, never speeds, just keeps moving, like a small theology on legs. Your own thoughts march too, slow, repetitive, occasionally tripping over themselves. Step, breath, curse, repeat. Marching is just sleep performed upright. You dream with your eyes open and mud for a pillow. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Boots hit ground in unison, and the sound merges with the heartbeat you're not sure you still have. It's musical, almost peaceful, until someone slips, curses, and restores the correct level of realism. The sun climbs higher, a weak spectator trying its best. Its light spreads across the field in a pale wash, turning puddles into mirrors that reflect how tired you look. You stop checking. Horses trudge beside you, snorting with moral superiority. Each one exudes warmth like an accusation. You consider walking closer, but the rider glares as though generosity has boundaries. Fair enough. He's nobility. His horse probably outranks you. Your stomach growls softly, a polite reminder that breakfast was mostly interpretive. You ignore it. There's a strange kind of hunger that feels almost spiritual. The body's way of confessing it still cares. Someone ahead begins to hum, a low, steady tune. Maybe a hymn, maybe something from a tavern. It doesn't matter. The sound spreads backward through the column, men picking it up without thinking. No one knows the words, but that's fine. The rhythm is the point. You realise this is what faith actually sounds like. Not sermons or choirs, just people moving in the same direction, hoping it leads somewhere less unpleasant. The mud deepens. Every step weighs more. Your boots, once reliable, now resemble wet bricks tied to optimism. You imagine monks doing their 2 a.m. prayers, the same devotion, just less travel and fewer blisters. You envy their stationary suffering. The captain rides past, his armour gleaming faintly in the weak light. He shouts something motivational about courage. The word freezes mid-air and falls into the mud behind you. You don't bother picking it up. After an hour, conversation disappears. Words cost warmth. Silence is cheaper. Only the sounds remain. The slap of boots, the whine of wagon wheels, the faint jingle of metal against leather. It's oddly comforting. You could measure time in squeaks. A small bird lands on a post along the road, the first living thing you've seen all morning that isn't under orders. It tilts its head, watches you with the expression of someone who can fly and knows it. You envy that too. Someone stumbles. 2 others catch him automatically, their movements rehearsed from repetition. There's no gratitude, just a grunt that translates to next time. It'll be you. It's not camaraderie, it's gravity shared equally. The march stretches on. The horizon doesn't get closer, it just changes shape to stay interesting. Time melts into steps. Your body forgets it's separate. Pieces. You're now officially a transportation method for your armour. The chaplain starts reciting again, half prayer, half weather report. He calls the wind honest, the mud humbling, and the day mercifully brief. You consider hiring him as your biographer. The sun dips slightly, casting long shadows across the column. The frost has melted completely, replaced by puddles the colour of effort. You watch them reflect the spears, the movement, the faint shimmer of heat that might be courage or collective delusion. After several miles, the order to halt comes down the line. It takes a full minute for the message to reach you. A ripple of disbelief moving through mud. You stop mid-step, feel your knees argue, and win on appeal. The sudden stillness feels louder than motion. You glance back over the path you've crossed. It looks like an anatomy lesson in exhaustion. Boot prints filling with water, steam rising, and somewhere far behind, the faint outline of where the camp used to be. The morning has aged into afternoon without permission. Someone mutters, "How far now?" The answer comes, "Far enough to still not be there." It's the truest statement you've heard in weeks. You roll your shoulders, stretch your neck, and look toward the horizon again. The road ahead wavers in the pale light, a thin line of mud pretending to be destiny. You smile despite yourself. It's ridiculous, but so is everything that works. The order to move again passes through the ranks. You sigh, lift your foot, and feel the familiar resistance of mud's affection. It's fine. You know the rhythm now. One more step, one more prayer, and one more hour survived. Evening returns as if the day forgot to end on its own. The sky folds itself into grey, then violet, then that particular colour of exhaustion that can't be named, only felt. You stop marching when someone tells you to, and stand long enough for your shadow to catch up. Around you, the camp forms again. Not planned, just inevitable. Tents rise out of habit, fires spark from memory, and humanity, against all logic, tries once more to be comfortable. The first flames appear small, timid as apologies, but soon spread across the camp in tiny constellations. Each one hums softly, a warm punctuation mark at the end of survival. You sit close to yours, palms extended, the heat stinging at first, the good kind of pain, the kind that confirms you're still in possession of skin. Smoke drifts lazily, curling into the air, carrying with it the smell of wool, ash, and every unwashed truth you've earned. The fire flickers in your reflection on a dented helmet beside you. You look like a ghost who decided not to leave. Someone passes bread again. It's no softer than before, but this time it tastes better. Hunger improves everything, even regret. You chew slowly, watching the sparks rise and vanish, thinking how much of life is that same performance. Brief flash, a little warmth, then nothing but memory. Still, it's enough to see your breath mingle with smoke and call it beauty. The chaplain settles nearby, his hands black with soot, his face glowing in the firelight. He doesn't preach anymore. He just sits and hums, a low tuneless melody that might once have been a hymn. You join him quietly, not in song, but in silence. It's a duet of sorts. All around, the fires multiply, one for every cluster of the living. From above, it must look like the earth remembering what warmth feels like. Each fire burns the same colour. Rank disappears in the light. Knights, peasants, priests, all equally illuminated, equally filthy, equally relieved. You realise it's the first real equality you've ever seen. Not written in laws or sermons, but in temperature. Everyone here is simply meat for winter, slowly cooking in gratitude. Someone laughs suddenly, a single bright note that startles even the fire. It spreads quickly, one laugh joining another, until the camp sounds almost alive again. It's not joy, exactly. More like a rebellion against silence. You lean back on your elbows, staring at the sky. It's still cold, but no longer cruel. The stars blink through the thin smoke, reflected faintly in puddles of melted frost. They look close enough to warm your hands on. You know better, of course, but knowing better has never stopped anyone from trying. Your cloak still carries the smell of every night before this one. Smoke, sweat, wool, and endurance. You pull it tighter anyway. It's not clean, but it's honest. Cleanliness kills, dirt endures. You understand that now. It's not philosophy, it's insulation. Across the fire, a soldier pokes at the coals with his knife, turning embers the colour of old rubies. He says nothing profound, just, "We'll do it all again tomorrow." You nod because that's the closest thing to religion left. A few men begin to doze, faces orange in the glow. The flames soften, the air thickens, and you feel the day exhale. Everything slows down to the speed of smoke. You glance at your hands, cracked, dirty, trembling slightly. They look ancient. But when you hold them to the fire, the light smooths them out again. You can almost imagine they belong to someone new each morning. The chaplain finally speaks, voice barely above the crackle. Another night, another chance. You nod again. It sounds like optimism, but it's really just accuracy. You throw a small stick into the fire. It catches immediately, burns fiercely, then falls apart into glowing dust. The moment is so brief that you laugh quietly. Even the wood is tired of pretending permanence. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts softly. A dog curls closer to the flames. The smell of damp earth rises as frost gives up. It's a simple symphony, wind, breath, burning, and underneath it the steady rhythm of people choosing to continue. You stare into the fire until the world fades. Around it, the glow pulses in time with your heartbeat. The smoke stings your eyes gently and you let it. Tears and ash look the same in this light. The chaplain closes his eyes and murmurs, "Everyone equal, equally miserable." You chuckle under your breath. It's as fair a summary as any historian could manage. The fire crackles, then sighs. You lie back on the damp ground, the warmth just close enough to keep your blood curious. Above, the stars look like holes punched in heaven so the cold can peek through. You think back to last night, how the frost felt like a verdict, how the dark felt endless. Now it just feels familiar, a house guest that finally learned to knock. You close your eyes, listen to the small noises, breathing, shifting, embers whispering to ash. Someone mutters in their sleep. Someone else snores with philosophical conviction. The world feels temporarily forgiven. The fire sinks lower. You watch the last flame lean sideways, tired but still glowing. It flickers once more, a final stubborn heartbeat of light, then folds into red dust. The night doesn't claim you this time, it simply loses interest. And that, somehow, is how it all made sense, back then. When comfort was an idea, not a possession. When warmth was a group project, and when survival meant perfecting the art of being slightly less dead than yesterday. You spent the night beneath canvas that argued with the wind, wrapped in smoke, dirt and mild faith, discovering that misery is surprisingly democratic. Knights, peasants, priests, the cold made no distinctions. It was the great medieval equalizer. Everyone froze, everyone prayed, everyone pretended to enjoy the sound of their own shivering. You learned that fire was both saviour and hazard, that lice were the most loyal comrades, and that frost had a personality, polite, persistent, the kind that knocks softly before taking everything. By morning you awoke as your own relic. The sun glanced off the frost like pity. Bread chipped your teeth, beer froze mid-swallow, and somehow the day still began. Because that's what people do. They continue, gracelessly, humorously, without ceremony, but with stunning determination. You learned that in the end, cleanliness kills, and dirt endures. Faith may have kept the chaplain warm, but grime kept everyone else alive. If holiness required frostbite, you settled for hygiene's heresy, staying filthy, breathing, and occasionally laughing. And then came the march, mud sucking at your boots, wind whispering its critique, hope lagging somewhere near the baggage cart. But still, you moved forward. Because in the long, slow rhythm of human stubbornness, forward is the only direction we've ever agreed on. And when the next fire was lit, you sat beside it again, hands outstretched, watching the light play on faces no cleaner than your own. equal, exhausted, and faintly amused. Not saints, not heroes, just people refusing to vanish before morning. If you're still awake, congratulations, you've survived another century. If you're asleep, even better, you've escaped it entirely. Either way, thank you for wandering through the cold with me. The tents are folded, the fires are fading, and the night has finally lost interest. So close your eyes, let the last warmth linger on your skin, and remember, sometimes surviving the night is the only kind of victory history ever records.